Hope you can see my screen. So today we will be talking about Azure Firewall and Azure Bastion Host. I have created a VM for testing Bastion Host, but still it is in creating stage since more than 5 minutes, 12 minutes it is, you see. Um, there could be some issues. We'll create another VM. Let's first create a VM, then we'll go into the topics of firewall. So VM2, and it's going to be East to S2 region. Azure user. Okay, so the VM will be created while we are discussing the Azure firewall. So basically, with the Azure firewall, right? So it usually uh, act as a we usually deploy this in a perimeter of network, or border of a network, right? So most of the customers uses different third-party firewall devices like Palo Alto, um, or Cisco devices, right? So for that, what we need to do is we need to set up the server infrastructure in Azure, and we have to manage those servers and their infrastructure, and you have to manage the rules as well, right? So it involves a lot of compute cost and operational cost. So with the Azure firewall, so we don't need to create any host. So it's a PaaS component that Microsoft is offering. So we spin up the Azure firewall service, and in the Azure firewall service, the backend components are being managed by Microsoft. We only have an option to create a rules, whatever the rules that are, help us to run our business securely. So those rules we can configure. So there is something called NAT rules and network access rules and application rules, right? So NAT rules can be used to, hide your VM's public IP. So when you provision your firewall, you get two IPs. One is the public IP and private IP. So you are going to use public IP of your firewall to connect to any one of the backend machines, and the private IP is going to connect it to your backend virtual machines. Okay. So this is about the NAT rule. So when you enter your firewall IP address, the public IP is converted to the private IP of your VM, and it will give a connection. We'll see how that works. We'll try to implement that as well. And coming to the network rules, if you wanted to restrict access to a specific ports, let's say DNS or DHCP or ICMP, so any ports that you wanted to allow or block, you can use network rules. And when it comes to the application rules, so you want to restrict access to a specific URLs. Most of the organizations does this, right? So you cannot access a specific URLs. So there you can add a pattern of URLs, right, with the star dot Google. So anything starting with the Google, it is going to block. You can have those wildcards to block certain URLs. So with the help of application rules. So what we need to do is we need to have a sub VNet created. In the VNet, we have to create one subnet, the name called Azure Firewall subnet. So it has to be the name. And within this subnet, you have to deploy the Azure Firewall component. While creating Azure Firewall, you have an option to choose VNet, and you have an option to, it will automatically pick up the subnet. Then you can create a number of subnets where your workloads are running. Right now, you can create, I have created one test machine for uh, keeping testing this firewall scenario. So going back to the scenario or implementation, let me show you. I'm going to virtual machines, and you can see the firewall RG. and I have one test machine created. This is my test machine, and this is part of a firewall VNet and part of a subnet called workload subnet. Okay, and this VM do not have any public IP associated, so I'm going to use private IP of my firewall to connect to this VM. Okay, once an entire setup is completed. So if I go to this VNet, so this VNet contains the two subnets, as I mentioned. So one is the firewall subnet and workload subnets where my workloads are going to be deployed. My VMs are going to be deployed. Okay. And I do have the firewall created. This firewall is again associated with this VNet. Okay. And this is the firewall private IP address, and the public IP is also created, and it is associated with the firewall VNet. Okay. So this is the subnet name, and this is the device name. Okay. So now, how to create? Let me just show you options here, right? If I go to firewalls, click on create. So it is going to give you, ask you for the resource group name and the name of your firewall and region, and you have to choose the classic. These are the firewall tiers, and you can choose the new VNet or existing VNet. If I choose existing VNet, so basically you have to input all this. This does not have this VNet. I think it's already used by my existing firewall. So we need to create a new VNet, and there you have to have a firewall subnet. That's it. You just create it. It will be created. Okay, this is how you create a firewall. Once a firewall is created, you can go here and go to the rules. And as you see here in the diagram, you have NAT rules, network rules, and application rules. Okay, these are the different rules we have. So we can get started with the each of the rule. Click on a NAT rule collection. I have the documentation copied here. So before we create those, I think we have to do few more things, right? So how does this VM knows that the traffic has to go through this firewall for any outbound, right? So the default route, right? What does the default routes? So the communication between the VMs in the same subnet, communication from the load balancer, and communication to the VNet, or anything goes to the internet directly goes to the internet, right? But you need to change this route and move this route through a firewall, right? So this can only happen using the routes. So we have something called a route table in Azure. We can create a custom route, okay, which will redirect the traffic from this VM to the Azure firewall. Okay, so this documentation say the same. First, let's create a route table. Then we'll ensure that the traffic is routed to this you know firewall for any internet communication. Okay, so to do that, let's do one thing. Let's search for the route table here. Click on route table, create a route table here. So I'm going to say select the firewall RG, and I believe it is in East US only, right? Yes, it is in East US. I'm going to say firewall route, okay, and create this. Okay, so route table is created, and here you can go to the routes, click on a route. Uh, internet to firewall. Okay. And what we are going to say, any communication with 0.0/0, which means this communication to the internet, the next hop should be virtual appliance. Here I have to add my firewall IP address, and the firewall have a private IP address. Okay, copy this private IP address and click OK. Now we have this route created, and this route table has to be associated with the subnet where my virtual machine is exist. So what is the subnet my VM is deployed? Let's check that. So if I go to this VM and it is deployed in workload subnet. Okay, go to subnets here, associate this route table with the virtual network, and in the virtual network I'm going to associate with the workload subnet, which means that any VM that is provisioned in the subnet, right, all the traffic which is going to internet will be routed to the firewall appliances, firewall, Azure Firewall component. If I go to this virtual machine again and go to this VNet and go to the subnet, so this is subnet, and you can see the route table is associated here. Okay, so now it's time to configure the firewall, right? So going to the
What if you
firewall,
have an NSG also associated to the
yeah, even if it
same
is
subnet?
if energy associated, the routes will be taken in place.
So the route would take the precedence.
Correct.
Okay. Meaning those
See, basically,
rules under NSG
no,
won't
no,
be
no.
effective if you have a route table.
Yeah. So their route table and network rules are different. So route
No, but
table tell you how your packet has to be travel, right? How the
mm,
communication should flow. Your energy rules tell you whether allow or block.
right. So
Okay.
which one would take the precedence? I think the NSG would take first check whether I need to allow or not. If
No, no,
it
no.
is
Again, I'm
allowed,
saying right. Um, the route table will route the traffic. Okay. Let's say
mm,
if I don't have a route table, right, the communication will go to the internet. While it going to the internet, it will check the energies. Okay. If energy is allowed, it will allow. If it is blocked, it is blocked. Now I'm saying don't follow that route. Go through the different route. So the precedents or rules, whatever you're configuring, the firewall will takes into place. You're getting my point, right? Most of the times you will see your user says that, okay, I'm not able to connect. When you come to the NSGs and go to network watch and check, hey, the port is already allowed, but still it is blocked because the communication is not going through the Azure backbone. It is going through the virtual appliance. You're getting my point, right? So we're routing the traffic. Did you
mm,
get it?
yep.
So now we are here. Let's configure the rules. So we'll go to the application rule first. Go to the application rule. And what it is saying, it is allowing access to only google.com, right? So let's do one thing. Target FQDNs or yeah, and application rule. Okay, source type is the VM address range. Okay, so let's say allow Google, right? I'm going to allow only Google. Okay, let me say the name app rule, and we can have priority numbers 200 and allow. So source will be my VM subnet. If I go here, what is the subnet range? This is the subnet range. Any communication coming from this subnet on HTTP, comma HTTPS, right? And to the www.google.com is only allowed. Other than this, if any request coming, let's say I'm browsing Microsoft.com, right? That will be blocked. So if you want it by default, everything is blocked in the firewall. If you wanted to like any communication, allow any communication, then you have to specifically mention the URL in the application rule configuration. Okay, so we have to wait for this to update completely. It's an updating status. So then once that is done, we'll go for network rule, then DNAT rule. So in the network rule, we are going to allow VODP. Okay. So one more thing we need to do is to test this DNS stuff. Okay. We need to add these IP addresses. These are the IP addresses of CenturyLink Corporation. They provide a DNS resolution thing, because when we try to browse www.google.com, that has to perform the name resolution. Okay, so that name resolution can be done by these IP addresses, and we need to update these in a VNet as well. So while this is happening, let's go ahead and update these in a VNet. So if I go to VNet, I have custom. Okay, save this.
So these are DNS servers operated by CenturyLink.
Though I mean that's a DNS service of CenturyLink. They provide DNS services.
Okay, and
Name resolution is done by DNS. Otherwise, if you have any DC domain controller like Active Directory, which
mm,
perform these name resolution, etc., right? You can use that IP address in the VNet, right? So we don't have any DC or anything, right? So that's why I'm using this.
so
I mean, even Microsoft
CenturyLink, I
documentation.
mean these IPs are your public DNS
These IPs are belongs to the
available
CenturyLink
for, yeah,
public
but they are
IPs.
available for public, right?
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay,
So this is given by Microsoft.
okay, given by Microsoft. Okay,
Yeah. So creating a network collection rules. Let's create this. Allow DNS, and the rule will be priority is 200. Okay. So here IP address and protocol should be UDP. Source will be the same here. Destination can be anything. A destination. Let's see what it says. Rules. let's create a NAT rule. Allow VM access. Priority is 200. Allow RDP, and it should be TCP. Source can be anything, I believe, because it should be from internet. Um, yeah, it should be star, and destination should be firewall public IP address. And yeah, so what is the firewall public IP address? Let me check here. This is the public IP. Source can be star, and destination port should be 3389. Translate this address to my virtual machine IP address. So virtual machine has a private IP address. So we can connect to this. I can also say 3389. Okay. So this is about this. Let me connect, save this. So once this is done, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use firewall public IP to take RDP. Okay. So this is the IP I'm going to use to take RDP. So let me give a try to see if this works. It's failed. Okay, it's working now. Now I'm able to RDP with the help of firewall IP address. Right, so it's going to perform a natting. It converts IP address and it is giving me IP address from public to private and giving me RDP access. So once I take RDP, let's try to browse the google.com. Ideally, it should be allowing google.com. Other than google.com, it should block the communication. So let me open Internet Explorer. So I'll browse to www.google.com. So google.com is reachable. Let me say microsoft.com. And you can see it clearly says that deny. There is no rule matched, right? So by default, all the communications are blocked, right? So it is blocked because there is no rule matching. If I add another rule which allow this URL, so it will allow the communication. Okay. So this is about the Azure Firewall. Okay. Let's check quickly about the Bastion host, right? So Bastion host, basically what you need to do is you need to have a separate subnet for Bastion host. If I go to the VNet, this is my VNet which I created, and if I go to subnets, so there is one subnet which is created for Bastion host, and Microsoft recommend to have /27 as the address range for um, this Bastion host. Okay, so this VM has the Bastion host and it is deployed in one of the subnet within the same VNet. Okay, how I can use the Bastion host? Okay, it is still creating stage. I have deployed another VM in the same subnet. Okay, you can see the DB subnet, but in the same VNet. Okay, to connect to this, just click on Bastion and use Bastion. So you just need to provide username and password, Azure user, and connect. So it's going to start pop up. It's going to be open another window where you can see the RDP session, and this session is secured with HTTPS port. And you see, right? Yesterday we have discussed about WVD, right? There also we have similar session. Everything is accessible through browser itself. Okay. So here also same thing. You can access this through browser, and this is basically you get HTTPS communication, right? This is my server. You can go to this PC and I can start my operations. I can simply close this when I'm not using it. So
This is
without, you don't need to enable public IP for access, and you don't need to allow a 3389 for RDP. It is a secure host that is being managed by Microsoft. It is like a jump box, okay, and which uses the Azure Backbone network to connect. So the communication is not over the internet, and the underlying host is being managed by Microsoft, and you get a console like a session desktop. Clear?
and this is RDP to which VM?
VM2.
And we have just one VM.
Yeah, so there is one
And
more VM I created, but it is still in a creating stage. Maybe it is stuck
okay.
somewhere.
So let's say, I mean, if there was one more, say
Yes,
VM1,
you can connect still.
um, we would have okay, we would have did the Bastion to for that VM and connected to that. Okay,
Yes,
got it.
you
Okay,
can connect a number of VMs, a number
so
of sessions.
whichever you want to, I mean, go to that VM and do the Bastion.
Correct. You're right.
Okay.
So let's see if this issue fix for the another VM. It seems that VM was not created on time. So we are just reapplying. So reapply usually change the provisioning status of your VM to healthy, and it will not require any downtime. Redeploy requires a downtime, but reapply is not. It's one of the famous troubleshooting steps that we do in day-to-day troubleshooting, day-to-day operations. Reapply. Earlier, we used to struggle a lot when we see this error. VM failed. We used to recreate the VM or a lot of stuff, but with this, I think it's easy. Okay, I think it's
Mm.
taking time. Any other questions?
So for a VNet, you'll have one bastion, right?
Yes, one Bastion subnet, and in that you'll have one host created, and that's being managed by Microsoft. You don't have control.
Okay, and same would be the case for firewall as well, right? So one VNet, one firewall.
Yes, the firewall can be associated to one VNet. Somewhat, I feel like the firewall infrastructure is better than this because you don't need to have a multiple firewalls set up. You have one firewall server, like say Palo Alto, right? You deploy in one of the VNet and configure rules there, and you can have in hundreds of VMs. Communication can pass through this one firewall server, Palo Alto server. Maybe there can be multiple VNets as well. They all can be peered to this Palo Alto VNet and have
Mm.
a custom routes where it redirect all the traffic to this Palo server and manage it. You can have only maybe you can have one more server to provide HA, maybe two more server to provide high availability in case regional outages as well. Okay, so
Okay.
I think we
So you're
discussed
saying,
last time, right? The
um,
hierarchy, how it usually looks.
I'm sorry,
So
the hierarchy for?
we discussed last time. I think what is the best method, right? You will have a traffic manager where all users requests comes to the traffic manager, and there from there it goes to let's say east west firewall. In east west you have two
Mm.
firewalls, just in case if one goes down other will take care of it, and from there it will goes to the backend server. Just in case if
Right.
east west 2 is east west is down, so the traffic will route to the another region west west, right? So same thing, but with this Azure firewall, it is stick to one VNet, right? So you may need
Mm.
to create multiple firewalls for each VNet. Otherwise, again, you have to have a same peering enabled between multiple VNets.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
We- Mhm.
firewall is going to be one per VNet. But again,
Yes,
if your VNets are paired, the
correct.
firewall on one of the VNet can actually work for the other VNets as well.
Right. I mean, that's what expectation. I have never implemented in my environment.
Okay. Okay.
That's
Sure.
how it should work. Is what otherwise the as I mentioned, right? The old approach is better if it is not working.
Mhm.
Okay, great.
Sure.
So, I think we are good with these topics in terms of infrastructure. We will talk about Azure App Services in the next session. Then we will also try to implement the front door service. Then we'll talk about the SQL database. Then we'll go for Azure DevOps sessions. Okay, ARM templates and Azure DevOps introduction. Okay, any other
Sure.
questions from anyone?
Fine, Kannan. That's fine. Thanks.
Okay, okay, fine. Thank you so much for your time. Bye.